I realize that as we talk about like Christmas traditions and different things, and as we talk about Christmas, that we're all experiencing Christmas differently. For some, this is the best Christmas of your life. Dreams are coming true. Things are falling into place. And maybe it's a first Christmas with a new family. I don't know. There's a lot of different fun aspects to Christmas, but for some, Christmas is a difficult time right now. Maybe it's a season, it's also a first, but it's the first Christmas without somebody that you care about. Or maybe it's the first Christmas where there's some transition. Last year, my family and I, we were in transition over Christmas. And so we spent Christmas in an Airbnb, and I don't think we had a tree. It was a funky Christmas. It was not like the ideal, wonderful Christmas. It was rough. And so I know what that's like to be in like that transition season in Christmas, and it's like, man, it doesn't feel as special as it has before. But I will say this, that no matter where you're at on that, I'm so glad that you're here today, because today is going to be a day of encouragement and uplifting, and it's going to be a day to celebrate and have some fun as well. What I will say is that Christmas traditions help to anchor us at times, right? Maybe you have a Christmas tradition. How many of you have Christmas traditions that you have? Okay. I've got a Christmas tradition. We have a few, but one of my favorites is that on Christmas Eve, me and my kids and my wife, obviously, well, I guess that's not that obvious, but yes, and my wife, we get together and we have Chinese food, and we do it on like the nicest dishes that we can find. Sometimes we've gone out and bought Christmas dishes so that we can have Christmas dishes. We bought them from thrift stores and all the things. We're going to have some nice dishes. Now we have, like, my wife won a raffle, so she's got some nice ones. But in any case, we'll set it up. We'll do a candlelight dinner with Chinese food. Here's how that started. It's random, right? It's kind of random, but how it started was that we were pastors. We were youth pastors in the Bay Area. My family lived in Modesto and Oakdale, and so it was a 2-hour drive to get all the way back for Christmas, and we had a Christmas Eve service. Now, I always celebrated Christmas Eve with my family. Michelle and I got married now, and we're out there in Santa Clara. There's a 2-hour drive. We're like, well, we got to come up with something after Christmas Eve service so we can at least celebrate something. Well, what do you want to do? I don't know. What's open? Chinese food's open. I'd learned that from a Christmas story, from a movie. I know that's where I can go. And so I went ahead and we ordered some Chinese food. We lit our unity candle, and we've been doing it every year ever since, with the exception of last year in transition. I love traditions, and I will say that's a good one. There's another one I don't participate in that I thoroughly enjoy, and it's awkward Christmas photos, awkward family photos. Anybody? I love them. I pulled up a couple that I love so that you could enjoy them with me. That one's fantastic. I'm going to buy the tree outfit. Next. Flash that cash, baby. Flash that cash. All right, we got another one. That one's great. We got another one here. That's terrifying. That's terrifying. And then, yeah, that's going to be me when I get older, tied to my family. I do love traditions, and one of the traditions that is common, right, is a nativity scene. You see nativity scenes kind of all over the place, and I like to have one set up in my house, even if it's just like a little small one. Because it's remembering, the reason for the season. It's not about gifts. It's not even about family, although family is a good piece of it, but it really is about Jesus. And in the nativity scene, you got some common characters, right? We all know the characters that are in the nativity scene. You have shepherds, right? 1 or 2, maybe 3. I don't know. It depends on your scene, And then you've got your wise men. How many wise men are there usually? Okay. And then you've got Jesus, baby Jesus. He's real cute and little. And then you got Joseph and Mary. And you've got the different characters of the Christmas story. And so we've been in a series for the last 2 weeks. And now this is the final week talking about Christmas stories. The characters in the Christmas story, what we can learn from them. We talked about Joseph. We talked about Mary. And today we're hitting the other characters from the Christmas story and really from the nativity scene. Now, here's the thing. Here's the thing. When we think about Christmas and these stories, it can kind of get old. We come to church on a Christmas service. We watch a Christmas movie maybe, and it's the same story, and it doesn't mean as much. It doesn't impact us. You know what I'm saying? I will say this, though. When we begin to realize, when we think about, go back to the reality that, like, when we think about the Christmas story and these people, these aren't just characters in a story. These are real people with real personalities, real lived experiences. These are people that lived in a culture, in a time, in a point in history, in a specific place. And they had friends and family that had thoughts about them and feelings about them. They had thoughts and feelings about what they were experiencing in the world around them. They faced challenges just like we do. They had successes just like we do. And so these are real people. So as we talk about these characters today, I want to encourage you that like when we look at their lives, it's not just about the story of the shepherds, the story of the wise men or Herod, but in fact, these are real people with real lived experiences, and I can relate to them. And so we can see ourselves in the stories of the Bible. You guys with me here? By the way, I like to have fun. I like to be a little more interactive, and so y'all are welcome to talk back a little bit. You know, the blank stares are cool and all, but we could do a little nod and a smile would be nice. I'll take one of those from time to time. Thank you. Hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to dive in. We're going to look at a couple people that we could relate to. For instance, the wise men. You look at the wise men. These are some characters, some people that we could really relate to. Lights are dimming. I don't know what's happening, but it's okay. Matthew 2, verse 1, it says this: Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. And about that time, some wise men from the eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem. And they're asking, where is the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we've come to worship him. King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard about this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. You have these figures that came in with incredible gifts. Some think that it might have been an entourage of like 300. Some think it was 3 because of the 3 gifts, and some say it might be more like 15. In any case, they're coming in with some pomp and circumstance into this moment where Herod is in charge of this area. He is ridiculously in charge, and he cares deeply that he is the man in charge. And they're saying that there's a new king that's being born, the King of the Jews. So these men are walking in, and now Herod's disturbed. All of Jerusalem is like, what is going on? And here's the picture. It continues and said, King Herod was deeply disturbed, so was all of Jerusalem. He called a meeting with all the leading priests and the teachers of the religious law, and he asked, where's this Messiah supposed to be born? In Bethlehem in Judea, they said, for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, O land of Judah, are not the least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you, who will be a shepherd for my people. And then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men. He pulled them in, and he learned from them about the time when the star occurred, because he's thinking, I'm going to find this little kid, and I'm going to kill him. This is literally where he's at this point. So he's trying to figure out how old this kid is so he can come after him. And it says this: then he told them, go to Bethlehem, search carefully for the child. When you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too. He's being dubious here. He says, and then the scripture continues, after this interview with the wise men, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them, and it stopped over a place where the child was, which is pretty amazing when we think about it. A star just kind of stopping over a specific location. This is a miracle. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house. They saw the child and his mother, Mary. They bowed down and they worshiped him. And then they opened their treasure chests and they gave gifts of gold and of frankincense and of myrrh. By the way, these gifts are super significant. And at our online service, I've already recorded the message. We're talking about what those 3 gifts mean and how impactful they are for our lives. Y'all, it's going to be worth tuning in on Christmas Eve at 10 a.m. for real. But anyways, they give these 3 gifts, and when it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them not to return. So here's the Magi. Now, there's a couple things to know about them. Again, people think that there's 3, but there was likely a lot more than 3 that were there. And they brought these three gifts, and these magi were actually from the school, essentially, of Daniel. 600 years prior, you have the Israelites that are in captivity in Babylon. And while they're in captivity, there's a man named Daniel that was taken captive as well that kind of rises through the ranks because of his wisdom and his ability to interpret dreams. And in that, he recognized, and he even wrote about the Messiah that would come, Jesus. And he referenced Isaiah, another prophet that's in the Bible. And he referenced Isaiah and said these other pieces about Jesus and that he's coming. And one of these scriptures talking about a star that would settle over. Now here's the picture. These magi, 600 years later, are still influenced by Daniel. Can I say that the way that we live today isn't for how we impact our own lives right at this moment? But in fact, the choices that we make, the words that we use, the decisions we make are setting up people for generations to come. One of the beliefs that we have as the Hope community is that we say all the time that we are planting trees that will grow and provide shade for the next generation. It's not just about us, but it's about the generations to come after us. And so Daniel had that type of effect. He was faithful. He was following God. And he wrote all these things down. And now you have magi, magicians, people who would have been spiritual seekers that are seeking something. And they're keeping their eye out for a Messiah who would come. And they recognize the star. And they change and shift their entire lives to go and find this one that could change history. And they take off in that moment. And it's all because Daniel made a decision. But I think, too, that many of us in the room could really relate to the magi. Seekers. Trying to find the answers to the spiritual questions of life. For the magi, when Jesus was born, they recognized that hope entered into the equation. And they came and they honored him with everything they had. Maybe you relate to the Magi, or maybe you might relate to Herod. Herod's an interesting character because Herod is the ultimate politician. He worked his way up over time to get into a place of authority. He was half Jew and half something else, and he kind of worked his way in to be the king of the Jews. And he was very possessive. To the point that he even killed his own children because he thought that they threatened his throne. So this is a very extreme character, and I don't think anyone in this room is on that level. But here's where I think that we could relate is that Herod was the kind of person that said, I believe in God. I call myself a Jew, he would say, but he didn't really practice it and live that out. It didn't affect his day-to-day life. And so Herod just lived to do what he wanted. I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to go about it, and I'm going to live for pleasure. I'm going to live for success, and whatever it takes to make it, I will do it. And some of us, and in that way, when he had the Messiah who came into the world, he didn't lean in that moment, but instead he leaned out. He said, I'm going to find this kid, and I'm going to make sure that he doesn't live and doesn't threaten me. Now, here's the thing. Some people, this is how we respond to church. And it's not just because of how church might affect our lives and following Jesus might cost us something, because it does. It's worth it, but it does. But we sometimes act this way also because we've been hurt by the church. And so we can't trust church. I saw something recently I really liked that said, the church doesn't hurt people. People in the church hurt people. Right? And what do we say? Hurt people, hurt people? We've all heard that phrase. That's not even in the Bible, okay? But this is reality. Hurt people, and we're in a church that's filled with hurting people. Someone's going to get hurt. And so what do? We can choose to be like Herod and to lean out and to be bitter and say, I'm going to do my own thing. Or we can choose to try to find some reconciliation to move forward. I'll tell you this. My wife and I, we are committed, and as we launch the church, and really our team, we've talked a lot about this. Like, we are committed to say, hey, let's let's walk with people through that process because honestly, it takes time. When trust is broken, it takes a long time to build it back. I went through my own pieces of church hurt, and it messed me up for some time. And I was a pastor trying to work through it. My wife stepped back from ministry for a season, working through it. Like, we've been through it. We can relate. It takes time. But we can't let that stop us from getting to the one who offers us hope. Is that a little too real in the room? Can we address church hurt in the church? Is that okay to acknowledge that it exists? Because I don't think that we can get healing around it unless we acknowledge it. And man, I would much rather have a bunch of people who got hurt by the church and are working through it and getting healing than a bunch of people who've never been hurt by the church because I know they're going to get hurt. Man, let's work through it together. Let's walk together. Maybe you relate to Herod in the skepticism and wanting to do your own thing. Maybe you relate in hurt. But then there's another character in the Christmas story, the shepherds. The shepherds. I think these guys are my favorite. You got to have your favorite, character. Jesus, I guess, would be my favorite. But, it's close. But, man, I love the shepherds. Because I think I relate to the shepherds. It's just these, blue-collar workers, What's interesting about the shepherds is we think about the shepherds and we think of them as, neat and clean. That's always the picture, right? They look the same as Mary and Joseph. They a little bit less jewels than the wise men, but they're still looking good, Got that beard on point. and they got these beautiful animals, like the fluffy sheep next to them, looking all kinds of kind and happy. And this is the picture of the shepherd. But in all reality, this was not what the shepherds were like. Shepherds were, and as a general rule, they were dirty. They were smelly. They didn't have actually an actual home. They were transient. They just kind of lived with the sheep. Wherever the sheep were, they were there. They weren't allowed, because they were unclean, to even enter into the temple to worship. So here now, when we look at the shepherds, we're looking at a group of people who can't go to church because they're too dirty and they didn't fulfill the requirements of the law. We're looking at people who don't have a ton of money, who are uneducated, and this is the shepherds. And they're there to greet Jesus when he's born. Now we're going to read this with that filter. You watch this. It's going to come alive. Luke chapter 2, it says this: that night there were shepherds staying in the fields nearby. They're guarding their flocks of sheep. They're doing their job. And suddenly, could you imagine? Imagine this is you hanging out with your sheep, your smelly sheep. You can't even go to church. You haven't taken a bath. Come on, somebody. And here you are, out here with your sheep. And suddenly, an angel of the Lord appears among them. What? And the radiance of God's glory surrounds them. They were terrified. They were terrified. Man, I can't even go to the temple and I got angels. I'm dying. But the angel reassured them, don't be afraid. He said, I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem in the city of David. And you will recognize him by this sign. You will find the baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth and lying in a manger. Suddenly the angel is joined by a vast host of others. Can you imagine? Once again, this is you and this is happening. Holy smokes, this is crazy. And suddenly angels joined by a vast host of others, armies of heaven, praising God and saying, glory to God in the highest heaven and peace on earth to those with whom God is pleased. The angels then returned to heaven. The shepherds said to each other, hey, let's go to Bethlehem. Let's go see this thing that's happened, which the Lord told us about. I want to just stop on this significant moment. Because these shepherds that weren't even allowed in the temple, they weren't even clean enough to step into God's house. They now are having the angels show up to them. Angels didn't show up to the Magi, the wise men. They just got a star. Angels didn't show up to King Herod. He was royalty, but the angels didn't show up. Who did the angels show up for? The shepherds. The ones that were kind of left out and maybe looked down on, the ones who felt left out. The ones who felt that weren't educated, that didn't have it all together, that didn't have themselves in perfect stance, that didn't have the perfect relationship with God, that probably did a lot of things that didn't line up with what God would say is right. And here, it's not to the righteous, it's not to the people who have it together, it's to the shepherd, the hurting, the dirty, the broken. That the angels show up and say, hey, you got to check this out. The Messiah has been born. He's going to change everything. Hope starts now. And so these shepherds are like, man, I can't even go to the temple. Angels are showing up. We should go check this out. and so they go and they hurry to the village. They're running there. They find Mary and Joseph, and there is the baby lying in a manger. What are the odds? After seeing him, the shepherds told everyone what had happened, and the angel had said what the angel had said to them about the child. And all who heard the shepherd's story were astonished. Why? Not because it was just an amazing story, because it was shepherds saying it. I think that God wants to do something in the lives of people in this room. That people will be astonished when you tell them what God did. That when we're like, man, I've been working through this issue in my emotions, and I've been dealing with anger, but like I met God, and I met Jesus, and I got plugged into community. I've been reading my Bible, and like it's changed. I've been dealing with this addiction, and like God has been working in my life, and I'm getting set free. My marriage has been struggling, but you know what? I met God, and let me tell you, my marriage is being restored as I'm learning about who He is, and I'm praying, and I'm spending time with God. Man, I don't even cuss anymore. I'm not even cheating people anymore. Like my life is changed, and people around you, around me, look around like, man, that's crazy. That's crazy. And that's the kind of thing that God is in the business of doing. Why do we celebrate Christmas? Why are we making a big deal about Jesus and this manger and all this stuff? It's because on Christmas Day, that there was hope that was born. And all of a sudden, there was hope for my future. There was hope for my past to be redeemed. There was hope for freedom. There was hope for healing. There was hope for salvation. Not just in this life, but in the life to come. That Jesus, on that night when He was born, He offered hope. And I love that it wasn't just hope for the rich and the educated. It wasn't just hope for the seeker, although the seeker has hope. It wasn't just hope for the bitter, although the bitter seemed to reject it. But it was also hope for the person who's just living life, trying to make it. And I'll be honest, I think that each one of us can see ourselves in this story. We can relate to one of these figures. Maya, can you come on up and play the keys just behind me here? We can each relate to one of these. So the question is, which one do you relate to? Which one do you relate to? Do you find yourself in the seat of the seeker? You're curious about spirituality. You're trying to figure out, man, is this all real? Like, I'm here, you guys seem nice, but I don't even know if like this is genuine. I get it. I just saw a pastor preach the other day, and I was like, man, they were so good. I'm like crying at the end of the message. I'm like, this is so good. And the first thing that came to my mind, besides that was so good, and like I was like, I need to call Michelle because she showed me the sermon. I need to like tell her a joke or something, because that's how I deal with emotions. And but that was number one. Number two was this. I said, man, I sure hope that this person doesn't make a big mistake soon. Hey, can we be real? Like, I get it that it takes time. Like, I get it. So maybe you're in that seat of the seeker, and maybe you're in that seat of the Harry that's like, man, I'm just trying to live life right now. I'm moving up. I've got success. I don't really need this. I'm just trying to hang on and keep going. There's hope for you too. When Jesus came, He came as hope for you as well. Or maybe you're like, man, I honestly, I feel like God couldn't accept me. Like, I'm so glad that this church isn't meeting in a church building because I probably would have been struck with lightning. And you know what? Hope was born that day for you too. No matter where you're at, hope was born. And Jesus came on that day, not for the perfect, but for the broken. And he spent his life, and you know who he hung out with when he was here? It wasn't the religious elites. He didn't go find all the pastors and kick it in the pastor's circle and hang out in the green room. You know where he went? He went and hung out with like the prostitutes. He went out with the tax collectors who would have been like the thieves. He hung out with some of the religious folks, but it was mostly to correct them. Like, who did he hang with? He hung with the people that he wanted to be with. The people that he was saving. Like you and like me. And he likes us. But more than that, he came to save us. And he has the power to do it. Hey, could we close our eyes across the room just for a moment? Today, maybe you find yourself in one of these seats, and regardless of which one you relate to, Jesus, he loves you. He has a plan for your life. He has a destiny, and it's planned out for you. And you don't have to doubt, and you don't have to worry about your future, because he's planned it out. You've got a friend when you say yes to Jesus that sticks closer than a brother, that's there at every moment and every time. In the darkest of days, he's there and he's with you. And this Jesus, 2,000 years ago, died on a cross. And whatever about that, but he did it to take on our sin. That we couldn't relate to God, and we couldn't go into the house of God. We couldn't have a relationship with God. We couldn't go to heaven. And yet, Jesus came, hung out with a bunch of sinners like us, and then he died so that our sins would cover. Our punishment was put on him, and now we can have life if we put our trust in him.